speaker, she was so inspired they set up and led a steering group to create the PSA. Having met and worked with many of the world's top professional speakers, they believe the most important lesson they have learned is the power of storytelling. Today, they will share some of their story and demonstrate how you can use your story to entertain and engage your audiences and make you and your messages more memorable. Can you please welcome Rikki Arundel? Yay!
Hello, good evening. So why do we do what we do? What on earth draws us into this weird and strange business where we race around the country and around the world, putting 40 to 50,000 miles on the clock, barely seeing our families, just for the privilege of getting a bit of applause at the end of a speech? Well, actually, I think it's pretty simple. I think we do this because we want to change the world in just some small way. I mean, I'm not talking about a Martin Luther King style change the world, and I'm not sure he thought that he was going to have quite such an impact. But it's about changing the world in just some little way. So let me tell you one story just to start, to get a sense of what this is. I'm going to tell you a story about the 14th of July, 1995. I was a very active member of Toastmasters, but there was nothing around to help me take speaking one stage further, to make it more of a business. And I just didn't know. But I had attended a few conventions and conferences, mostly for the financial services industry. And I had seen top professional speakers up there. I was an avid purchaser of Nightingale Conan tapes. I loved J. Douglas Edwards and Norman Vincent Peale and Zig Ziglar and all these great names. There were very few women, I have to say, back then, but mostly these great speakers. And I was talking to somebody about what on earth there was that was Toastmasters. And I said, well, why don't you join the NSA? I said, the what? I said, the NSA, the National Speakers Association. So I checked it out and thought, well, that was pretty good, and decided I would join the NSA. And there were 6 members. I spoke to one of them and got to know him a bit. He said, you should come to the convention. What? I said, the convention. They have this big convention every year. All the speakers get together. And I looked into it. I thought, wow, it's going to do that. This is going to be my holiday for the year. So I booked my flight, and 14th of July, 1995, I headed off to Minnesota, or to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Not the first time I'd been there. The first time had been a very dramatic occasion. I used to work for a big tech company, and we'd had a user conference there, and I had arrived just on the day that the Minnesota Twins, if you understand baseball, you'll know that that's Minneapolis's baseball team, won their way into the World Series. America has this World Series of baseball. Only the Americans actually participate in it, which is an American style. But anyway, first time they'd done it for centuries or whatever. And all of a sudden, Minneapolis was packed with thieves who broke into my room that night, stole my passport and a whole bunch of things, and I was left a bit thwart. So I'd had to go back to New York, renegotiate my way out of America. And during that time, it was October 1987, 4 million trees blew down in Britain. My ex-wife totaled my car, and I arrived at that. So that was the first time I'd been to Minneapolis. So this was far less dramatic. I simply attended a meeting. I went there as somebody who spoke in public. I returned a professional speaker. That meeting utterly and completely changed my life. It's one of what I call those extraordinary moments. And sometimes they're not massive. This was just literally attending a meeting. I came back absolutely enthused with it, started talking to people, looked at becoming an NSA chapter. Somebody else went to a chapter meeting in America, came back, and before I knew what had happened, we'd pulled together 10 people who were prepared to put the effort in. And on the 30th of January, 1999, we launched the PSA at the Millennium Gloucester Hotel. That was the PSA story. That was the founding of the PSA. It's a story which is, I can build in lots of adventure. I can make it last about 15 minutes if I want to. And that's the great thing about good stories, is you can expand them and contract them. But it's also a story about my greatest achievement in life. It's about the thing that I'm most proud of that I've done. It's the thing that's most impacted my life and my business. So, and I met lots of people. I met Fripp, I met Mitchell, I met Jack Canfield, Doug Stevenson, Les Brown, Brian Tracy, sitting down and having dinner. There's Zig Ziglar next to me having a chat. I mean, it's just, so if you haven't been to an NSA convention, trust me, it's something you ought to do. And do it quickly, because a lot of the old people are dying off quickly. But it was an amazing thing. 2,500 speakers, 13 concurrent sessions every day, just utterly amazing. That utterly changed my world. It changed my inspiration, changed what I wanted to do. And I started to learn some important things about speaking, the speaking business, and what we needed to do. Now, I've got 3 goals. I'm going to bring my flip chart in because I'm not going to use slides today. Just pull in a flip chart because I just want to mention 3 key things that I think that we need to make sure that we do. And these have got to be the goal of everyone's speech. And goal number 1 is I want you to remember my message. If I can't achieve that, then what was the point of speaking? What was the point of doing anything? And I will guarantee that you have been to conferences, you've been to presentations, and you couldn't even remember anything that one of or 2 of the speakers said in the previous session by the time you finished the coffee break. It was just utterly gone over your head. And unless you look at your notes, it's gone. That's no good. I need you to walk out of there with a message that sticks. And it's never going to go. And the only way I'm going to do that, I'll illustrate soon, is with stories. But the second thing I want you to do is I need you to take action. I'm going to deliver a speech which is about making a change which I think will benefit your life. And if you don't do anything about it, well, my speech has failed. It's done nothing. If you can't remember what I said, if you can't take action, and you won't take action unless you can remember what I said, it's not going to work. And the third thing, I want you to remember my name. And the reason I want you to remember my name is very simple. When somebody says, how was that conference? Oh, brilliant. Oh, this is fantastic speech. Oh, God, what was the name of the speaker now? I want you to know, oh, my God, you should have heard Rikki Arundel's speech. Rikki Arundel talk about, I want my name to be there, because otherwise I'm not going to get rebooked. I'm not going to get booked for future events. So that's the 3 goals that you need to be thinking about for any speech. What's my message? What's the action you're going to take? And do you remember my name? So I'm going to keep remembering, you've got my name. It's up here on Zoom, so I'll keep on mentioning it anyway. So those are the goals that we're going to be going for. And it also brings us back to the most important thing about any speech. You have to have one clear message, purpose. If you haven't got that sense of purpose, and I'm going to come back to those in a minute. I'll bring the chart. For some reason, it's not in the right place today. OS, purpose, clear sense of purpose. Now, if you can make the title of your speech, the message and the purpose, that's probably the best thing possible, because if those are nicely connected, purpose of the speech, message that you want to remember, it's all in the title of the speech. That is the most effective way to make sure that your message is going to get remembered and that some action is going to get taken. Probably one of the most powerful speeches I ever saw was actually not by a professional speaker. It's a guy who's a musician, a blind musician, and he used to go to the NSA conventions, and he was paid to literally listen to the speech. And when he'd heard the speech, he would walk up onto the stage and he would sing a song that he had written in his head while he was listening to the speakers about the message that the speaker had just put across. Absolutely brilliant. And he'd done this for 3 or 4 years, and suddenly the new president around about 2000 said, no, I don't want to do this again. Need to get something different. And they said, we've already booked him. Oh, well, get him to do a keynote. And Ken Medema said, I've never done a keynote. I said, no problem. We've got the best coaches in the world. So he did a speech, and the speech was entitled, "The Magic Begins When the Speaker Listens." Magic begins when the speaker listens. So he did about a third of the speech talking about his life growing up as a blind person and how he had to use his ears instead of his eyes. Then he got a few people up and did some exercises and games playing with sound. And then he got people to tell him who had influenced him in their lives, and he did some songs, his sort of masterpiece. That was over 20 years ago. I can still remember that speech as if I was hearing it again today. So memorable, utterly stuck. The message, listen. Up on my wall, I've got a couple of posters here saying, listen, it's my word for the year. Reminded me again, we don't listen enough. We spend too much time speaking. So there we go. Now, let's talk a little tiny bit about one of the most influential people in terms of speaking, one of the great speaker coaches. And we're going to go back a long way to find the best speaker coach in the world. And his name is Aristotle. He also did a huge amount about plays. He was a great philosopher, huge amount done, but he came up with what he called the 3 great proofs. This was his formula for persuasion. And if I'm going to deliver a great keynote speech, it's got to be a speech which persuades, which changes people's minds, which makes them take action. Unlike a trainer, I can't get you to do it, check it, make sure you've done it and go away. I'm going to speak, leave, and that's it. It's up to you to take action, because you'll never see me again. We may never have any more contact again. So it's all going to happen in that 30, 40 minutes, whatever time I've got available. So he said that we've got ethos. That's about credibility. And it takes up about 10% of our speech. That's, giving the audience a sense of, this is a person I need to listen to. This is the credentials. This is somebody who I need to speak to. So my giving a little bit of a story about how I set up the PSA creates a good story. It's a story about illustrating how we can build stories from our past, but it also sets me up with some credibility for what I do without me banging a drum about, what I don't want is lots and lots of marketing stuff. It's just a story that becomes an interesting story about our common association here. The second one here is logos. And this is about 25% of the speech. And that's the facts, details and facts that you want to put into it. A lot of people spend way too much time on this, but it's about 25% is what the best speech is. And this is analysis which has been done looking at TED's talks. Carmen Gallo, who did this. And finally, we've got pathos. This is the emotional element that goes in, and this is the stories. Now, this, as you can see, 25, 35, we've got 65% of the speech is emotion. The most powerful TEDx talk that has ever been delivered was a TEDx talk by Brian Stevenson some years ago now. Brian Stevenson runs a social justice charity. He delivered a talk actually it was TED, not TEDx, but he delivered a talk at TED that was so powerful that without him actually asking for anything, by the end of the one-day TED conference, he had received donations exceeding $1 million from the audience at the TED conference. And if you listen to Brian Stevenson's talk, you'll see that it's mostly about his life growing up as a young, underprivileged young Black kid, the challenges he faced during his life, and the things about his grandmother and the power of his grandmother, and all of that. It's just an amazingly powerful story. I'm not going to retell that story. Go have a listen to it. I strongly recommend it. Brian Stevenson's TED talk, and it's the most powerful talk ever delivered on TED in terms of financial response. And this was just, donations to a social enterprise. So this is, again, what you've got to think about, the ethos, logos, pathos. That's the sort of average mix. And if you look at the best TED talks, Carmen Gallows looks at this in his book, and this is what he's found the most persuasive talks roughly use that formula. Another person that's worth listening to and thinking about is Chip and Dan Heath. These are professors at Stanford University. And they did a little exercise with some of their graduates. They said, what we're going to do is to pitch And they had to come out and make a pitch to the audience. It was a 60-second pitch. And one of the groups that were going to do the pitch were told specifically to make it a story. After the pictures were all over and people had voted for the pictures they wanted, they looked at the results, and the results were really, really simple. 5% of the people listening had remembered facts that had been delivered during those pitches. 63% had remembered the story. What Chip and Dan Heath got from there was that a story is 20 times more memorable, more stickable than facts and details. Around about this time, you may have noticed that some of the overseas charities, and I can't remember exactly, it was Children in Need who actually did the main change to start with. Children in Need used to give big pitches out to get funding in, and they just literally gave all the facts about how many kids were dying and how many didn't have water and how terrible it was. And yeah, it was heartrending and it was terrible. And they got some money. And then they decided to do a pitch talking about one child and their story of how they walked. I think it was something like 10 kilometers every day to pick up a pitcher of water and bring it back to the camp. And it was just a basic story about one child. The amount of money they got was almost 3 times the other level of advertising, which shows that stories inspire people to action. It makes them remember what you're talking about. So we must use stories. Final thing I want to do, just a little bit of background on this, is Princeton University did a really interesting experiment. They got a storyteller, and they actually got somebody who spoke Latvian as well as English. So they were completely fluent in Latvian and English, and they told the same story in Latvian and in English, and it was recorded while they were in an MRI scanner, so that they were basically, their brainwave patterns were all being measured while they delivered the speech. They then got some students into the MRI scan, and they got them to listen to the story in English and in Latvian, because they were trying to make sure that this was actually about the story and not something else that was going on from the storyteller. They wanted to look at what was going on in the brain of the storyteller and the listener. And what they found is when the students were listening to the English versions of the story, their brainwave patterns matched almost identically the brain patterns that were measured of the storyteller. So if you've ever thought, I wish I could just take my story and the feeling I've got and just plug it into someone, you can. If you tell a story, you immediately put the person that is listening to the story into the same brain pattern as yourself. This is why if you've delivered a speech to a big audience, you'll know that if you get the story, if it's working right, you can create utter silence and then huge, emotional shifts by just taking the audience on the same journey with you. The Latvian story, students didn't respond to at all. So it was all about the story. It wasn't about something the storyteller was doing. It was purely what they were hearing and what was going on. So where do we get our stories from? Well, I've been looking back in my past quite recently, trying to figure out, where did my storytelling come from? Because it's only recently that I've sort of suddenly realized in the past few years that storytelling is one of my, superpowers, if you like. It's what I do. If I'm delivering a speech, it's always been stories right from the very beginning. I just automatically did it. I thought, where did that come from? Well, let me tell you a story that will help. On the early hours of the 19th of May, 1941, a small fleet of ships, led by one of the most powerful and fastest of warships ever built, slid silently out of the Bering Straits, headed for the North Atlantic, where it was going to wreak havoc by destroying convoys taking food and materials from America to Britain. The ship was called the Bismarck, but it wasn't as quiet as they'd hoped because it was spotted. The British immediately instructed the HMS Hood, our own giant warship, and for 20 years, the greatest and biggest warship in the world, to intercept and destroy the Bismarck. At 5:45 on the 24th of May, the Hood, with a small group of other ships, including the Prince of Wales, intercepted the Bismarck and instantly started to open fire. The Germans didn't actually react immediately. Apparently the captain had been really concerned about losing his ship on his maiden voyage, but after 10 minutes, they retaliated. At 6 a.m., 5 minutes later, the Hood took a direct hit. It hit the magazine. The explosion was so powerful, it literally split the warship in two, and the whole thing sank within less than 3 minutes, taking all but 3 of its 1,418 crew with it. The shot reverberated around the Navy there and back home. The Bismarck just vanished. Churchill insisted, sink the Bismarck, find it. Every ship was sent to try track it down and sink it. And they kept a few little skirmishes and then it would disappear. They could not track it down and get hold of it. And then on the 26th of May, a codebreaker at Bletchley Park intercepted a call requesting Luftwaffe support, and they identified where the Bismarck was. It was heading for France. It had been damaged in the battle and was looking for help to get itself into safety. It was less than a day away from safety. Only one British ship was anywhere close to being able to intercept, and that was the Ark Royal. They lined up 15 very old biplane swordfish torpedo bombers on the deck, all ready to fly off. And the front pilot said, I have a problem. I'm not happy with the plane. They were left with 3 options. They could either pull all the planes back, remove that one and put everything restacking back in. But if they did that, the chances were the Bismarck would be out of range and they would lose it. They could just push the plane over the end. The Admiral wasn't very happy about doing that. Or alternatively, they could convince the pilot to take off. Well, the ship's engineer was called, and he knew nothing about aircraft engines. He was an engineer, a marine engineer. So all of the Fleet Air Arm officers were pilots. So the only person left was the chief engineer for aircraft engineers, a chief petty officer, Ted Arundel, my dad. So they pulled him forward. My dad came up, had a look at the plane, said it's all okay, convinced the pilot to go. And it was one of the 3 planes that actually struck the Bismarck, disabling it, preventing it from escaping. My dad always believed that one more sortie, they would have actually sunk the Bismarck, but the Navy insisted they wanted to do it themselves. They were really angry about the Hood. And so they came up, fired 3,000 shells, 500 of which hit it, none of which managed to sink it until the Germans actually scuppered the ship themselves. That's one of my dad's favorite stories. It was how I sunk the Bismarck. We lived in a pub, and if he'd had one too many sherries, I knew that the Bismarck story and the stories of India and the stories of the Freemen, he was a consummate storyteller. I grew up with these stories constantly being told. I've got enough of my dad's stories to probably fill a book of stories just on him alone. But it wasn't until literally a couple of years ago I realized that that's where my storytelling came from. And it's probable that for some of you, storytelling has come from your parents, from your family, from people that you know. And that's probably one of the best places to start looking for some great stories, because there are some really good ones. Okay, if you're my age, you'll have people who were in the war. If you're not, then you'll know people of my age who can tell you stories about being a hippie and stories about Woodstock and the Bath Festival. And there are, we've all got huge numbers of stories which we can find ways to bring in. Now, who would have thought a story about sinking the Bismarck could go into this? Well, it does. Because it's a perfect story to illustrate just how powerful my dad's. And again, that's a story which I could expand. So, what are we going to look for? Your best stories are always going to be your own stories. The worst stories are going to be somebody else's. Now, I'm just going to make this really do not use somebody else's story, especially other speakers' stories. I know I was at a conference once, and a speaker called Robin Fielder had got up, and I'm going to name him because what he did was just wrong. He started telling what was Norman Vincent Peale's keynote story, a story about, problems and why people don't have problems. And when he started the story, I looked around and there were a few people around me, friends at this conference, and we all been brought up on Norman Vincent Peale. I'd listened to his tape so many times, I knew the story off by heart. It is not a story you would ever tell. It had become almost a cliche, and yet Robin decided to tell the story as if it were his own. Well, he lost the audience. People literally stood up and walked out. How many of you have never heard the starfish story? How many of you have never heard the starfish story? Good, good. So everybody's heard the starfish story. I don't need to tell it. Fine. And won't tell it because it's a cliche story. It's not, it probably isn't true. It's just a story that somebody told somewhere along the line. If you've ever listened to Ken Robinson tells a beautiful little story, and that story is about a little girl who was sitting down. Now, I'm going to say Ken Robinson's a great speaker, over 50 million views of his TED talk, absolutely great. He tells a little story of a little girl in class and she's drawing, and the teacher comes up and says, "Oh, well, that's good. What are you drawing?" She says, "I'm drawing a picture of God." "Oh, right," the teacher. "Well, nobody knows what God looks like." She says, "They will soon." Now, that's a simple little story, but if you read Chicken Soup for the Soul, which I was looking through the other day, I found the story. So you've got to be careful. You know, if you're going to use a story, either credit it if you think people may not have heard it, but be careful. If it's a cliche, just let them go, because they're not going to help you. And you can probably find a better story from your life that gives the same message, that tells the same message. You really need to think about that. I was listening to an audio book by Michael Port, and Michael Port tells stories about his life, but every single story was about how wonderful he is and how brilliant he is and how amazing he is. And I've never managed to get to the end of his book because I just can't stand somebody who's literally just constantly name dropping, constantly pumping up himself. Yeah, I've met a lot of people, I've done lots of things, but if I keep pumping out names, I'm going to give a few that might help my credibility, but then stop. Don't want constant, big stories about himself. So do that. So that's a couple of things there. A confidentiality. I made a really bad mistake once. I had been asked to go talk to an organization where 40 members of staff had banded together to sign a petition to prevent a trans woman from using the female toilets. Completely against the law. And this company just didn't know what to do with because such a large number of people had done it. And I talked to them and, basically, help them sort of see what they needed to do. They didn't hire me, and I went off to do it. And I thought, that's quite a good story. I'll use that as a case study in my workshop and get people to think about what would you do if 40 members of staff signed a petition. Well, I'm halfway through a workshop one day and we'd gone through number 2 and I'm getting some feedback, and all of a sudden somebody puts their hand up and says, "Just like to say I am the person in your case study number 2. I thought, oh no. I hadn't asked permission. I hadn't talked to them about what was going to be happening. They knew who I was. Now, as it turned out, they were okay about it, and we became good friends, and that was fine. But it might have gone really badly. It might have really badly damaged my credibility. So when you're using a story, either make it anonymous, change the names, change the context, make it in such a way that people can't identify, oh my God, that's me they're talking about, because it won't do you or your credibility any good. So that's a few things. Lots of originality. Now, first thing I would suggest that everybody does is draw a timeline. Just take your life and draw a timeline. And what you're looking for when you've got a timeline going around, you've got, here we are at birth starting, we're heading here. And at some point along here, you're going to find that you were expecting to go there and you went there. What happened at that point? What knocked you off into a new direction? Because that is an extraordinary moment. That's a moment in time when you suddenly went zipping off, and you'll find then you've got here, oh no, hang on, we're going this way now. And I've got all sorts of things that I can tell you, and they're great stories whenever you find these points. Now, sometimes you hardly notice them. 1993, I'm standing and I'm doing a lot of work for a tech company, The managing director walks through. I was as a consultant, I was doing workshops, helping them do all their workshops around the country, helping independent financial advisors learn how to use computers and helping to market them. And I was doing all sorts of PR work. And the managing director really liked my work. So he came through one day, he says, he says, Chevy's just resigned, the marketing manager. How do you fancy becoming our marketing manager? And I thought, what do I do? I was just about to complete my first book, Sell Your Way to Success. I was doing some work with the Institute of Sales and Marketing Management. I happened to relaunch it. I had some PR work I was doing for other companies. Things were looking all quite good. And I said, I thought about it. I said, no, I think I'm going to stick with that, because I knew what he was like. He was a tough bus. I mean, this would be a really tough job to do. It would have been well paid. It would have been great. I had no idea how well paid it was going to be, because the guy who took the job went on, and in 1998, they did a management buyout. In 1999, the IPO, one of the first dot-com boom companies. The managing director got 400 million pounds out of it. The guy who got my job, about 20 million. Regrets? I've had a few, but not that one. Because when I look back through my life and I realized that had I taken that job and not carried on, that the route I would have gone would have taken me somewhere that I probably didn't want to go. It would have left me in a relationship I didn't want to stay in. It would have meant that I probably wouldn't have come out. I probably wouldn't have gone to university and done my master's degree. I probably wouldn't have gone to the NSA in 1995 because there just wouldn't have been time. It was just such a busy business. I wouldn't have been behind setting at the PSA. I'm sure the PSA would have eventually happened, but it wouldn't have happened then, because there just wasn't somebody with the right contacts and the right passion for building an association. So a lot of things that really were so important to me when I look at my life would not have happened. Yeah, I'd have had loads of dosh. Yeah, I'd be able to sit back and relax and do nothing, which is what most of them did. I might have run a property company or, it wasn't the life I was meant to go. So I don't worry about what happened, but it's interesting to see just how things might have changed, how things might have been different, what would have happened, where we would have gone. So look at your life. And I've got so many, the car crash when I nearly totaled the car on myself and completely changed the course of my life. There are so many points. How can you find places in your life where suddenly you were fired up in another direction? A little conversation outside of a college. It was 1968. I just failed all my A-levels. I'm sitting down having a chat to a friend of mine. Why don't you join the drama group this year and do the play? We're doing Julius Caesar, auditioning next week. I said, I don't know. I'm not really into Shakespeare much. And this girl walked past, really, really gorgeous girl, absolutely had the hots for her. I was a 19-year-old lad at the time, 18-year-old. I made a comment. He said, oh, you should see her in a bra and knickers. I said, what do you mean? So we only have one changing room in the drama group. I said, okay. No, I then met her boyfriend, so that didn't happen. But I auditioned for the part of Mark Antony. And I thought, if I'm going to audition, I'll bloody do it well. So I learned most of that big friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears speech. And nobody was prepared to battle with me. But the director said, well, okay, fine, you've got the part, but you're not good enough. I want you to do some drama classes. So I looked at the drama course and found it fitted with all my free periods. So completely unplanned, I took effectively an A-level in speech and drama. And that was the start of my speaking career, because from that point onwards, I was hooked, became a red coat the following year. How I ended up in the insurance industry is another story, but I got into training and then into speaking. My whole speaking career and the way I do speaking came from doing that drama. And I would recommend to anyone who wants to be a great speaker, take some drama classes, because it will really, really open up not just your storytelling. It isn't about sort of finding the stories. The drama classes will make you better at telling the stories, at building the drama, at using pause, at changing your voice. At if you want to do the old sort of West Country voice, I can do that as well, because I was brought up in the West Country. So you can play with voices, and I've done a bit of book narrating since then. So we've got key moments of transition. How am I doing on time? Just tell me if, no, we're fine. Moments of transition, moments of triumph. Have a look at your moments of triumph, things that you've really seen. Now, bear in mind that the moment of triumph is not what you're looking for. To make the story great, you need to track it back. What started it? Where was the start? Where was the extraordinary moment that put you on the trajectory that took you to that extraordinary moment, that brilliant time? Now have a look at what were the barriers. What was in the way? What might have stopped that from happening? Because if you can find those conflicts, because this is the true essence of great stories and why stories are different from anecdotes, is somebody wants something, has difficulty getting it. I don't know whether you know that the oldest known piece of literature is a poem called the Saga of Gilgamesh. It's a Sumerian poem, dates back 5,000 years. But the plot of that particular poem is exactly the same plot that was subsequently used for Dr. No and every other James Bond film that has ever been produced since. It's about, the monster, fighting the monster. In every single James Bond film, there is a monster, the villain, and Bond is basically going out the knight in shining armor to take down the monster. It's almost always the same story. They try to change it, but fundamentally that's what we end up with. And it's not just that, it's the same with Star Wars. They're all come from exactly the same story as that. So if you've got a really good story that you want to get people really engaged with, look at the plot for Bond and Star Wars and things. Find one in your life where you overcome the great monster. It might have been the Inland Revenue. It might have been a disability. It might have been cancer. It might have been, an upbringing that basically meant that you couldn't get to the university or whatever. It's the challenges that you overcame. And I think this is the danger. Some people think, look at these people who've got all these wonderful successes. They're not great storytellers. Great storytellers are the people who had real problems to overcome. And if I look at some of the best stories, I look in the PSA, one of the best speakers, one of the most successful speakers is Richard McCann. And if you look at the speech that he uses has made all that success, it's all about how he went to prison and was really on a downward trajectory, changed his life and brought it back around, and how he can now help you. That's his basic story. He uses them, and it's the monster of the Yorkshire Ripper who destroyed his mother and put him on a downward trajectory until he finally saw the light and came out. It's basically the classic story. And if you look at any of the books on storytelling, you find it's actually there. So, well, we got lessons learned. Right. I was doing I really worry when people say, I haven't got any stories, because I know everybody has. And they're amazing stories. Sometimes it's just a matter of being able to see them and getting somebody else to help you. Get together with some other people and share some stories. I was doing a workshop once, and we had a woman there who utterly refused. It was part of a public speaking workshop. Said, I haven't got a story. I've got no stories to tell. Nobody's be interested in mine. And she just refused to do it and did a complete washout speech. And I thought, well, how do I help this person? And then during the break, I heard her telling everybody about her recent holiday where she had been trekking in the Peruvian Andes. I said, well, why didn't you tell us about that? She said, well, it's just a holiday. I said, no, it's on people's bucket list. It's what people want to do. They want to hear the story. How did you get there? What were the challenges? How difficult? Tell the story. We all have them. We just got to find them. Now, the important thing is you need to make sure you get a story that fits the message. I've got lots and lots of stories. Now, when I'm doing a speech, I think, well, what can I use? And if I'm doing one story, literally, this story takes way longer to tell it than it actually took to happen. It's 1970, whatever, it's 1971. I lived in East London, Leytonstone, and I used to go walking over Wanstead Flats. I used to love going walking over there. I was walking there one day, and as I'm walking there, there's a small lake, and beside the lake, there's a woman, and there's this big log. It's a tree trunk that's being chopped and cut down, and on the top of this log is a little kid. He must have been about 2, 3 years old. And I could see his body as he was standing on top of things. I could see his arms were beginning to slightly swing. And he's standing on, it's really high. It's probably about, 1.5, twice his actual height. And he clambered up to the top of this, and his mother's just standing there, and she's having a fag and looking out over the ducks. And the kid is just, I thought he's going to jump. I can actually see his whole body about to jump. And that was it. He launched himself off. And as he did, his mother spotted out of the corner of her eye that he'd moved, and reached for and grabbed his leg. Of course, that stopped him going forward, but his head carried on, crashed down, banged against the bottom of the tree. He screamed out. She picked him up, slapped him across the other leg, screamed at him for jumping. I thought, oh my God. I wonder how many times since then over his life that young boy reached a point where he was about to make a big leap in business or in his life, or do something adventurous, and just as he's about to do it, the memory that he can't really even remember flashes back in of what happened on that day and stops him from doing what he needs to do. So can you see how just a little tiny story, something I saw walking along a street or walking along a park, suddenly becomes a story that I can use to get across a message. And that's the most important thing about all of your stories. Telling a story just for the sake of a story is no good. It might be a great story, it might be really interesting, it might be fascinating, but if it doesn't have a point, if it doesn't make your message more memorable, if it doesn't make it stick, it isn't doing anything, because people will remember the story but have no sense of why they got it. So all the time, look at your stories and think, right, what point have we got? Now, I have this thing about speaking. A little formula which I learned. I was heading for a Toastmaster conference one year. I was just going to go as a delegate. A friend of mine, who some of you know, Philip Campani, was going to be doing a workshop, but something cropped up and Philip suddenly had to cancel. So I got a sort of last-minute panic call. We see you coming to the conference. Could you do a workshop? I said, yeah, okay, I'll do something. And I thought I'd literally have 24 hours to put together a workshop. So I picked, for any of you who've been to Toastmasters, you'll know there's a manual of 10 speeches. So I had a quick look through them. I thought, okay, fine, I'm just going to do the basic principles of Toastmasters. First speech is called the icebreaker. It's about speak from experience. The second speech is about speaking from passion. Speak about something you feel strong and passionate about. And the third speech is about organize your speech with a clear sense of purpose. And I'd sort of talked these through, and somebody came up afterwards and said, do you realize if you put them in a different order, it spells pet? I thought, oh, right, I'll have that. So I took it, purpose, experience, and passion. And then I thought, well, there's something missing, and it's the rest of the Toastmaster manual, and that's all about performance. PEP, P-E-P-P, PEP is a simple formula. And if you think about it, clear sense of purpose, you want to speak from experience. As far as possible, use your experiences. My dad's experiences I count as mine because they were stories he told me. I kept on learning. It's part of my experience of growing up. But I'm sure you've all got them. Passion, talk about something you feel really passionate about. If you don't have a passion for your topic, drop it, leave it, let somebody else do it, somebody who is passionate about it. Because what I found as a speaker is that our focus becomes narrower and narrower and narrower as we stay in this business. When I started, I was a trainer. I spoke about everything to do with success and management and sales. And my God, that was such a bright, broad thing. Now I speak about storytelling. I speak about transgender awareness. That's it. And even that is probably too broad. And if you look at academic, same thing. If you do your PhD, it's one simple statement, one simple focus and fact. And the best speakers really, really, really focus in and drill in to one very specific topic, often in a very, very specific market. I know speakers who are millionaires who did nothing but speak to dentists in America. I mean, literally, that's it. So you can really focus. So purpose, experience. Now I want to take this E because the E is quite useful as a memory stick If you're speaking from experience and you've got the E here, just think about this. If you want to structure a great speech, you want one message. And then you just use 3 points, point 1, point 2, point 3, and story. It is, you know, you can include facts in it as well. Story, facts, stories that illustrate your point. Just make your 3 key points you want to make. And that is probably the most useful, effective, powerful structure. Speeches get so complicated. I think sometimes speakers think they've just got to try and take everything they know and cram it all into 30 minutes. You can't do that. The skill of a great speaker is not what you put in, it's what you leave out. And you just got to get it down to what's the one thing that they can take away? What's my one message? Make it the title of your speech if you can. Find 3 stories to illustrate elements of how that comes together. I'm not going to go to the whole thing about that today because there are different ways in which you can make that work. But the reality is, if you give much more than 3 things, then you need to start looking at various other aspects to make it work. So I'll tell you what, we're at 32. I think we're okay. What I'm going to do now is, I mean, I have umpteen stories. What I'd like to do now, rather than carry on with any more of content there, I'd actually like to make this a bit more interactive. And I would like any of you now to ask, any questions you've got. I've been looking in the chat down here, not seen many questions, but please, any questions at all about speaking, about or about storytelling in particular, and let's see if we can have a little look at them. Anything at all. Gillian.
I was once told not to make everything about you, and don't be saying I and me and make it about you, and yet the storytelling part, making it about you and the adversity that you've overcome, is. So how do I rectify those 2 things, or was my advice wrong?
When I first, I'm going to show you how this will switch. I want the story to be a story that's my experience. I don't necessarily want it to be about me, but this is actually going to be a story that is about me. But what I will ask you is whether you feel at the end of this little story I'm going to tell you. When I went to that first NSA convention, one of the first people I met, Alan Lord from the UK, said, "You've got to meet W. Mitchell." I said, "Who's W. Mitchell? I've never heard of him." "Come along." He said, "Here, I'll introduce you." He took me through to the bar and introduced me to this guy. And I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. Sitting in a wheelchair was what I can only describe as a patchwork quilt of a man. His face had been pieced together by a surgeon. Had obviously suffered considerable burns. His hands weren't hands, they were like knobs, which had, and he held one out. And I thought, what do I touch it? I literally did not know what to do or what to say. And there was no way I could hide how I felt. And Mitchell said, "Rikki, hey, come here, sit down." And he told me his story about what had happened, about the motorcycle accident that had burnt nearly a huge part of his body with 3rd-degree burns, where the surgeon had actually had to take skin from the parts that weren't burnt, using a photograph, patch it together to try and make something that resembled his face. How he'd learned to fly, or how he'd stood for governor of California under the banner W. Mitchell, not just another pretty face. How he had then learned to, amazing story. And how he had then learnt to fly and broken his back. And then I saw him, I've since seen him speak. And he rolled out onto the stage in his wheelchair. He looked at the audience and says, "Have you ever been to prison?" "I have. Every single day of my life. But it's not what happens to you that matters. It's what you do about it." And then his speech. So in the first opening, the message, so powerful, so clear. when I came to change gender, I realized that Mitchell had taught me the most important thing I needed to learn. People were going to struggle with coping with someone that has a male voice that looks a bit male and masculine and now dresses as a woman. And, it's not easy for people to, what do you say? Am I going to get this wrong? And I realized that what Mitchell had done, he realized that everybody had a problem the moment they met him. So he told them their story. And within 5 minutes of him starting his story, how he looked had gone. Who he was became far more important. So that's a story about my experience. Does it come across as me, pumping myself? I've engaged other people in that story. It's a story about a lesson I learned, a lesson that you can actually associate with, because I'm saying, look, this is, and it wasn't a story about me being all wonderful, great. It's about me really struggling with a problem and learning how to cope with it and learning how to use that when I had the same problem myself. And I'm sure that there are going to be people in the audience who will hear that and think, oh my God, I can do that. Because that's what I want, is I want somebody who's transgender or who's gay or who's lesbian coming out to be able to say, I can do this. I heard that story from Rikki and that'll make me do it, help me do it, because that's how I change the world, one story at a time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that puts a completely different spin on, so I was struggling with that, to be honest, and I have been struggling with that for quite a while. So yeah, I get that now. Thank you.
What people want to hear, Gillian, is not how wonderfully successful you are, but how you overcame the struggles.
Yeah.
And that's the most important part of what we do. Tell people about how you overcame the struggles and they'll thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Can I ask then about the struggles? Because mostly, apart from the last 8 months, my life's been pretty darn easy. I had a really relatively, fairly relatively privileged upbringing. I look back and think I can't see what the struggles are. All right, I've been running a business for 21 years. Yeah, but so have loads of other people. So how do I find out what those struggles are that are going to sort of inspire people enough?
Have you not had any struggles with that, Chantal?
Oh, with running my own business?
Yeah.
Not that anybody else has, not that nobody else has had.
But the point is that there are lots of people, younger or newer to business, coming up, and they're at the moment about to die because they've got a struggle which you've cracked and they can't figure their way past it.
Okay. Genius.
And you did this with marketing. People are thinking, I hate marketing, I can't stand it, I don't want to do it. And you say, look, just do this.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'll tell you an example of something here that somebody just went absolutely loved it. We're doing a one-to-one on Zoom on someone's somebody else's meeting. And I was talking about the problems that I had. I was terrified. I used to hate seeing myself on video, absolutely hated it. And it took me, I did my first 30-day challenge just to overcome seeing myself on video by doing it every single day for 30 days until I got to the point of thinking, oh, okay, maybe you're not that bad after all. But I thought I was horrible. Would never use video in public speaking training courses because I thought the moment people see themselves, all they see is every single thought that nobody else even notices. Oh my God, look at my hair. Oh God, why did I wear that? Oh, that's the wrong thing. Yeah, and that's so we're trying to, we've got to just get past that. And anyway, this girl said, so I just can't stand it. And I'm been reading something about marketer Seth Godin. And he said that there's a really big problem with Zoom fatigue. And the biggest contributory factor to Zoom fatigue is seeing yourself on video all the time. And this girl, talking to this woman, she said, oh God, I hate that, absolutely hate it. She said, I don't even go to meetings because of it. Because I said, well, if you just put your cursor up at the top corner of your picture, click on the corner there, you'll see hide self view. Click that. She went, oh my God, oh, you've saved my life. One simple thing transfer. That was absolutely made her day. She can now go to meetings, click hide self view, and can go on. I said, the only thing you got to remember is that people still can see you. Don't pick your nose. It's just a...
Yeah.
So can you see little
Yeah.
tiny stories, and that now becomes a story I can tell.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because-
Caroline, you've got a question. Take yourself off mute. And then Simon, I think you have a...
Hi, Rikki. I just wanted to get your thoughts about telling stories that are deliberately contentious. Because again, that's some feedback that I've heard sometimes is if people, whether they're agreeing or disagreeing, they're engaging with your story, they've got an opinion, as opposed to a story that might be nice, but it's nothing more than nice.
Okay. I think you've got to look at the impact of very contentious stories. And it means I'd need to probably look a little bit more why a particular story is contentious. So I get involved in some contentious stories. I have to avoid some of them on Twitter because I know that if I engage, I will draw in a whole bunch of anti-trans TERFs who will rip me to pieces. And I know that there's nothing I can do or say that will change their mind. As far as they're concerned, it's, trans women are men, that's it, end of story. And they're going to push that story and they're going to pull every single negative press story that they can find from anywhere across the world to illustrate their point. They're not interested in listening. So on some things, I just don't engage. If you ever saw the movie War Games back in the 80s, some of you may have seen it. Little boy is hacked into NASA and has basically triggered an unstoppable thermonuclear war and has to talk to this AI computer and convince him not to actually push the button. And it's all done because he plays tic-tac-toe and realizes the only way to win is not to play. And that was the message. What a strange game. The only way to win is not to play. And that's dealing with trolls. Now, other contentious issues, I will get involved in the contentious issues. J.K. Rowling says some really stupid things. I'm going to challenge. I'm going to challenge that. Other people have said things that are. So I've got to measure up and think, right, how is this going to work? I don't mind doing those stories because, frankly, if it irritates and ruffles the feathers of people who are anti-trans, that actually doesn't concern me. It's not going to affect my business. It's not going to mess me up. There are some things that are a bit political that I back off because I think, if I hit this one, okay. I happen to believe that there is a story around the towers collapsing in New York City on 9/11. That's the official conspiracy story, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense a lot. But I know a lot of people totally believe in the official story. So I tend to avoid getting too heavily into discussions about what happened to Building 7, which is, and I just have to watch it because I know that some people get really, really uptight about it. At the moment, I have not had a vaccine. I have some real issues about vaccines. I have issues around the HPV vaccine that was resulted in a huge numbers of problems 2 or 3 years afterwards. And I don't like the Oxford's AstraZeneca vaccine. I've not really gone public on this because I think, 75% of the population have had the vaccine and are probably going to be, there's going to be some confirmation bias in any discussions I have because they're going to want to justify why they did it and why, therefore, if I didn't do it, I'm putting the world at risk. So I'm probably going to avoid that contention. So can you see, you've got to make a value judgment on contentious issues. In some instances, you think, no, the contention is actually what I need to address and I need to be seen to be contentious. On others, you're going to think, no, if I'm contentious on this one, I'm going to lose clients I really would like to work with. It's not that important that I lose clients.
I guess going back to your PEP, does it serve a purpose?
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it on purpose? Is it meeting what you want to do? Is it, if it's a passion that you're passionate about, well, go on if you're anti-vaxxer and you're passionate about it. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I understand that some people are. Fine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Simon, did you have a question?
kind of did, but it's kind of been addressed, because I was about to ask that issue of, if you're using your own personal stories, how do you identify that line between the story serving the purpose and the story serving the emotional masturbation of the storyteller?
Yeah, I think, it's a good point. If there are some stories which I love, but what I've got to do is go back to the purpose of my speech. Does the story serve the speech? Is it actually illustrating a point I want to make? If it doesn't, it's actually going to probably damage my speech, because it's going to take us off somewhere, and the audience is going to be thinking, why did we get, what was that about? Why? If the audience can hear my story, and I don't want to explain the story. I hate books where you read them and the author keeps on explaining what's been happening, even from the simple things, he said cringingly. You thought, well, if he said it cringingly, the story should already tell me that he's going to say it that way. You don't need to describe the way he did it. So don't tell me about it. Show me in the story. Do you see it? And so this is, I want a story that I get so engaged in that you don't need to explain it. I've got it. I've got the story, understand the message. You can have a phrase that pays, which Doug Stevenson talks about if you want, just to sort of get, lock it in so people have got the message. But don't over explain a story. If the story needs explain, it's like a joke. I mean, and you must know the same thing, Simon. If you have to explain the joke, you didn't tell it well.
Yeah.
I made a mistake of telling a dyslexic joke once to somebody who was dyslexic. And what does DNA stand for? National Dyslexic Association. So.
Oh, brilliant. That is cracking. Right, questions. We've got this opportunity. We've got Rikki here. Any questions at all from you lovely lot? Anyone? Right, okay, got none. Give us something else then, Rikki. You've got 5 minutes.
Oh,
we're
right.
just getting our money's worth here,
I know. So we'll so yeah, I'm going to tell you one little thing of a little bit of a story that I did some coaching some time back for PSA members. The idea was I was going to coach them, and then they would go away. So they would deliver a speech. I'd give them about an hour of coach, 3/4 of an hour of coaching. They'd go away, work on that, come back, and then we'd video it. So they'd actually have a video that they could use on their websites. And one of the people on that particular event was a guy called Barry Mapp. Some of you may know him. I'm not sure if he's still a member, but he'd been a senior executive in the NHS. And he had this whole thing about Newtonian management styles, and he came along and gave this 15-minute talk. And there were other good speakers there, and they all looked at me at the end of the speech, and I could actually see Tracy, one of them, Tracy Place, saying, "Oh, be interesting to see how you deal with this one," because that was awful, and it was a dreadful speech. Now, I normally go back through my pep talk and think, right, what's the purpose of the speech? I wasn't very clear at all. So I started to do work on the purpose, and then I was started to work on experience. So where's this come from? What experiences have you actually been used? And where are your experiences in this? Because I've got the sort of the theory of the Newtonian management style. Didn't actually understand it, but I got that it was a theoretical approach. I said, but why is that important to you? How did you learn it? What did you do? And it wasn't there. And at the end of 45 minutes, I knew I just had not cracked it. And when you're coaching somebody, you listen, you go through, and you somehow you've picked it, you've cracked the thing that was not working, got somebody to work on it, and suddenly the speech starts to come together. May not be the only thing, but it's the thing that was important. So, and I knew I felt real failure. I felt, God, this hasn't worked. And I felt, wow, I completely got this wrong. Anyway, we're having a break, and Barry starts talking about Reiki. Most men don't even know what the word Reiki means. Well, then, this was 20 years ago, the word Reiki, and I'm thinking, I pricked up my ears because I got my level 1 Reiki. I thought, somebody who was also into Reiki, and his whole body changed. He lit up, his body became animated, and I thought, oh, passion, passion, passion. That was what I was missing on. What was it? And Barry was passionate about Reiki. I said, look, is there any way that you can take your passion for Reiki and put that in this speech? Well, a month later, returns, puts a chair on stage, gets one of the audience up, stands and starts to do a bit of a discussion about Reiki, and does some Reiki on somebody. And while he did it, he was talking about how the principles of Reiki can translate into the boardroom, to management, and how you can use it. And the whole speech literally came alive, and I fully understood it. I thought, oh, we're there. And this was the most important thing. It's about people going down the wrong thing. When you start to look at your stories, you will start to find those stories which you are really passionate about. And somehow those stories are going to tell you about what you should be speaking about. And I know that that's one of the toughest challenges every speaker has to learn. What is my topic? And it does transition over years, but I've just spent literally 3 months asking myself, what am I going to speak about for the future? Where am I going with the future? And I've got it now. It's all falling together, but it took a bit of time to sort of get that and get into the passion. And part of it was going back to my founding story, finding the connection to my dad's stories, and all of that started to gel and think, this is where it's got to go. I asked for lots of help. Simon was one of the people who offered and has given me feedback, which is what I wanted, people just telling me what they saw. Chantal also has given me some really useful help. So lots of people have given me a bit of help. And that was another thing. I'd never reached out and asked for help. Even though 20 years with the PSA, I always felt I was the one who was giving the help, not the one who was getting it. And so the first time I'd actually reached out and helped. So one of the things I think it's worth trying to do for yourself is have a look at your founding story. See if you can find the story about what got you where you are. What is it that made this your life's mission, your life? So what is the big, there's a really good book. Here it is. This book, Key Person of Influence, by Daniel Priestley. And it's just a 5-step process to becoming really focused on what it is that you do and what you're about. And it's all about people becoming entrepreneurs. But I've really liked it. I've got the audiobook. I've been listening to this one. It's helped me to organize things in my life. And it's helped me to start looking at what is my story? Why do I do what I do? What is it that makes this happen? So I think if you can search around in the archives of your life, find that founding story, find the extraordinary moment where it all started. And that might be right back in childhood. It might be something that happened much, much later, something that literally threw you off track. I do meditation every day now, and I listen to one man in particular, and his name is David G. If anybody of you are into meditation and haven't looked at Inset Timer, is it Inset Timer? Anyway, it's an app.
It's
Insight Timer.
Love it.
30,000 meditations on there, all of them available free. And David G is the one who's really got me. And if I've looked at David G's story, I've learned a lot about him. And he was an investment manager, and he was basically on a downhill trail to total destruction. Drink too much everything. And now he's become one of Deepak Chopra's students. He's built his own business up and is now running a hugely successful meditation and personal development business in California. And I just love his meditations. And he studied so hard in Sanskrit and yoga. And I thought, oh, wow, what a guy. Totally focused in what he's doing. Totally believable, totally connected. Some other people may not like him, but there's loads and loads of others. So listening to his story made me think, oh, here's a guy who actually somewhere along the line, he bumped into somebody and it actually changed the direction of his life. And there have been moments in my life that totally changed the direction of my life. And I think that's what you need to look for, those moments that actually knocked you off. Boom. Suddenly you're going down a different trajectory, different place. It may not have happened yet. Maybe it's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe it's just happened today.
Right. Well, time's nearly up, but thank you so much for that, Rikki. I'm going to have to spend the rest of the night now pulling all of that together in my own head, because I do have stories. I love telling stories. I just didn't know how to tell them well, and I've got a better idea now, much better idea of how to do that. What we're going to do now is, in chat, we are going to put our key takeaway or takeaways from this evening. But just to let you know that Simon, we will be saving the chat, and Simon will keep that to put something in our Facebook group. So can you now just spend a couple of minutes putting your key takeaway or takeaways from this evening into chat?